Brooke, welcome to the Deep Life.
Awesome. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. I'm so excited to have you here. This is a conversation I'm really excited about because there are some concepts that we've both been really interested in that
Mhm.
I've noticed that you're able to teach and explain really well. So I'm looking forward to kind of picking your brain and learning from you. And I think this is the kind of conversation that's really going to help connect a lot of dots with people, with the
Yeah.
listeners, and start kind of viewing their body a little bit more holistically and kind of
Yep.
notice how everything flows together. So let's jump right in to fascia because it's something that we haven't talked about much on here. So if you could share sort of what fascia is and how it works and why it's important.
Yeah. Um, so in the most fundamental, fascia is a triple helixed collagen fiber. And the way that I want to break that down for people is basically like they're little nanotubules in the shape of a straw. So if we took a bunch of straws, right, one straw by itself, not very strong, but if we took 50 of them and braided them together, all of a sudden we're dealing with something that could support a 10-pound weight.
Mhm.
So fascia is all made of collagen in our body, right? If you go ahead and take your tongue and put it to the side of your cheek, it's mostly collagen there.
Mm.
And our saliva and our tears are made up of something called hyaluronic acid. And hyaluronic acid is so important to the fascia conversation because this is where the most recent developments in fascia have come out of since 2018. And this is really why I feel like I even have something to say on the topic because most fascia release techniques have come from 100-year-old philosophy, mostly coming out of Dr. Ida Rolf's philosophy. So anybody that has done Rolfing, which is essentially the birth of deep tissue massage, we've been following her protocol and philosophy for the last 100 years. She had a lot to say on the topic, and to me, really brought the massage into the healing arts. Um, Now, because of the studies on hyaluronic acid done by the Italian doctor and osteopath, Dr. Carla Stecco, she's been studying this thing, hyaluronic acid. Now, it shows up in your saliva mixed with a couple enzymes. It shows up in our tears. Our tears are mostly hyaluronic acid. And the juices that flow through our body when we're turned on, that's also hyaluronic acid mixed with a couple of things. So, this acid molecule is known as the anti aging molecule in the skincare companies. So, we've been making it synthetically and then applying it to our face, but our body makes it. And this is what Carla Stecco has proved. Now, hyaluronic acid is one acid molecule that houses 1,600 water molecules. Now, the reason why this is so interesting is because one acid molecule can hold this huge slew of water, right? Now, water is H2O. So there's two hydrogen atoms, or actually oxygen atom. Hydrogen is electrostatic in nature, meaning it can hold like an electric charge. And the way this hyaluronic acid moves through our body is through a repulsion system. So when we have our fascia, fascia is made of collagen and it's in the shape of straws. And these straws are braided together. And in some spots of our body, let's just say there's only 3 or 4 straws stuck together. So it's still pretty pliable and loose. This would be like the fascia underneath your cheek. There's not a lot of meaty tissue here. It's pretty shallow. You can feel the bone right through. But in our upper quad, that's 4 to 6 inches of nothing but meaty tissue until we get to the bone, right? So that's a lot of fascia wrapped together. Now, people ask me all the time, what's the difference between a muscle knot and a fascia knot? There
Hmm.
is no separation. Every single
Hmm.
muscle fiber that we have is wrapped in fascia. But in order to feel what's inside of the muscle fiber, we actually have to relax and soften the fascia around the muscle tissue itself. So, this collagen network is very skinny and shallow, like a little spider web in the body in some spaces. But in other spaces, it's like 50 of these straws braided together. Now, when we have that much stuck together, what happens as athletes and over time, like we get dehydrated, then we go to school for 8 hours a day when we're kids, and they put us in these tiny shoes, and we're sitting chronically with these kinks in our body. Just by sitting right now, we are kinking the straw like fascia fibers at our hips, behind our knees. So at the top of the calves, at the bottom of the hamstrings, at the top of the quads, usually pretty systemically filthy for us.
Mhm.
So when I work with people, I'm like, I already know there's going to be 3 sections of your lower body that are throwing off the entire upper body because we sit. Then even if they have great foot health, if they have bad foot health, and the bones of the phalanges are stuck together. So I start always with the feet because we walk on our feet. And the
Mhm.
fascia of the foot is very different than the rest of our body. So just like those gluey spider webs of our cheek, at the base of our foot, it's like a spring-loaded industrial strength rubber band. So
Mm.
taking care of the fascia fibers down here takes much longer than the rest of the body. Now, because we have so many bones in the foot, there's 26 bones in the foot. For comparison, there's only 4 bones through our entire leg.
Mm.
So imagine when we're kids, right? Our
Mhm.
mom's like, oh my God, I found the cutest shoes. You're 3. I'm going to put these on your feet. And then like, we go through our growth spurts. So like our foot has to be jammed to the front of the shoe before mom and dad are going to buy
Mhm.
us a new one. Well, when we do that, we are smashing the fascia between the toes, shoving them in, and then it throws off the entire gait, throws off our walking gait. It throws off how we run, how we jump because of this. And like any woman that's worn high heels for any significant length of time can tell you when we do this to our foot, our knee hurts.
Yes, it does.
Yes. So my grandma, God bless her, she's 90. She has never used a walker and has never used a cane. And what I'm teaching, I showed my grandma and she rolled. It's simple. My technique, I built, I'm an athlete. I hurt myself repetitively. I have had 4 concussions. Even though I played golf at a very elite level, I played really hard. I had a younger brother and I always thought that cool athletic guys were the hottest. So I like was powder puff captain quarterback. Like I can throw a mean frisbee. Like I show up. The ping pong table is mine when there's a ping
Yes.
pong table. You know what I
So
mean?
these weren't golf concussions. They were
No,
also.
they were soccer.
Oh, okay, I was gonna say that's pretty fascinating for you to
Yeah,
I
I
play
was in
golf
mid.
really hard.
Yeah. No, I never got like hit with a ball or anything. But soccer, I would take the soccer ball to my
Mhm.
face like it was my job somehow. I don't know why. Just like, oh, stop it, with my face. That's not smart. Anyway, so 4 concussions later, and a pretty severe hip injury. I was not excited about the answers I was getting from doctors. And then I had the privilege of like 5 of my really good friends became doctors. 4 of which I don't think are great question askers. They're really great textbook readers.
Mhm.
But one in particular, Bernie, he became a naturopath. And so he's the one I call. When I get hurt, I call Bernie and I'm like, listen, what do? I have a foot problem. And I was training really hard. I was doing my sprints 3 days a week. There's this conditional exercise I love that releases growth hormone at 1600% for 48 hours. It's like the basis of what Tabata was, but the research is like so buried. But there's like, I believe in sequences. I believe the body is a really untapped potential computer. And as I find these sequences, I'm realizing like, why are we not all talking about this? Like hyaluronic acid can be prompted to be made. Our collagen tissues are shown to reduce after you're 30, but if we're creating this acid, we should be able to restore the synovial joint fluid. Like, HGH can be produced at 1600% for 48 hours, just if conditions are met. Like our body's a self-healing machine. Like we just need to work with it. So I called Bernie. I'm like, I have a foot problem. In about 4 minutes, he's like, you don't have a foot problem. You have a fascia problem coming from your calf. And that's all he had to say. And
Mhm.
it set me on a rabbit hole because the more questions I asked, the more I'm like, well, what's this fascia stuff? And like, why have I never learned about it? And what I realized is that it's the vocabulary that's tripping people up so much. So fascia used to be called connective tissue. We've known about it for 400 years. Da Vinci was the first one that sketched it. We actually have a lot to owe Da Vinci because he
Yeah.
was such a good sketch artist. He was the first one that actually made any sort of sense with the medical drawings because before him, doctors were drawing cadavers. Could
Mhm.
you imagine those original sketches? Like, this is the heart for sure. And it's like, but you guys can't even write your signature.
Seriously.
So, yeah. So Da Vinci was the first one that started charting these bands that insert into the back of the skull. So there's 26 fascia bands that connect to the back of the skull. And was the obsession, the biomechanical obsession with fascia for the last 100 years since Dr. Ida Rolf has been around these fascia, these denser fascia bands that make up, I call them the industrial strength rubber bands. It's what makes us spring loaded. So the reason why we can take an infant and hang them off of a pull-up bar and they have no muscle mass and they don't rip in half is because of the fascia.
Mm.
Now, as we're kids, the fascia works perfectly. And it works perfectly because these nanotubules are still in their straw-like shape and the fluid is working through it, no problem. This hydrostatic, electrostatic, piezoelectric, viscoelastic current, right? So still very misunderstood, but it's holding a shape. And the shape to me is my obsession. To me, this is where the doctors have been like glazing over what happens in the body. Because when you open a cadaver, the veins most people don't know this, the veins of our body collapse. They become completely flat. And that's what separates arteries from veins. Arteries will hold the circle, veins collapse completely. So when we age and we become dehydrated and we're working out and we have injury and we don't recondition the fascia around the injury, we just wait till we feel better and then we train harder. What happens is we have these fascia tubes that are starting to become flattened. And now this fluid's not working over it anymore, right? And as we continue to train, we kind of impinge it. So the fascia tends to be worse in athletes than the average person because we condition our bodies to move in the same way. Sometimes we like push way past that dehydration level. Like, I don't know about you, but like if I'm not about to throw up, it's not a real workout. You know, I want to touch that like almost passed out, almost puked, then we call it a day. That's when we know you're growing.
You're speaking Dan's language.
Yeah. I mean, that should be the barometer that we hold as athletes. Like, how else do we get better and, double our capacity other than, doing crazy stuff? So, unfortunately, like many athletes, and like, I really want to work with dancers because this happens in dancers at such a young age. Like, you'll have 18-year-olds that blow their knees and it's like, and these are people that some of the fascia in their body's working perfectly. So as these nanotubules kink or we get injured, they start, operating. And then what we eventually do is we flatten it all the way. And the current fascia release techniques that are out there, there's like 24, including my own, on this list. And I feel like every 6 months, somebody sends me one I haven't heard of. I'm like, it's added to the list. And I always ask the same series of questions because I'm a researcher, right? I'm just doing my best to figure it out as an athlete. And I'm not the first, like Ashley Black, I feel like really set a precedent. She's the one that invented the fascia blaster. She cured her rheumatoid arthritis. She had early onset rheumatoid arthritis as a cheerleader. I like so respect where her head was at. And then the marketing team created it like, you can get rid of cellulite, but she cured her rheumatoid arthritis. 100%. And it was in her hands. So for me, Gary Lyman, the human garage guy, he had a torqued belly button. And you can see in his sequences, he's kind of obsessed with the fascia of the midsection. Tom Myers, who got to study with Buckminster Fuller, who I have just inhaled Buckminster Fuller work. And it's funny because my grandfather was obsessed with him too. Tom Myers has a very biomechanical approach to the structure of the body. And he does structural analysis based on the main fascia bands. So looking at the biomechanical tension of the main fascia bands. So when I look at all of these fascia release techniques, I'm always like, okay, first off, like, do you need a therapist? Because it's way more expensive for people if you need a therapist. So my questions when I learn about a new fascia release technique is always, do you need a therapist or can I do it on my own? 85% of what's out there is you need a therapist. And you go through like a ceremonial thing, like you work with them on a daily basis for 30 days, or you go to their retreat for 2 weeks and they fix you and they give you your homework. So it's quite pricey. And then the way that they look at the fascia For me, the way that they look at the adhesion, so the impingements in the fascia, what has been the process so far is to rip them. So you find the tension within the body and then you rip it. And then it's like, is it gentle? Does it leave bruising? Is my next question.
Mhm.
You know, like, can I tell my grandma to do this? Or because like the fascia blaster, although she had great success, brutal. Absolutely brutal. Leaves you with bruises and marks. And then we're expecting the fascia to repair. So movement is better than stagnation. So like doing something is way better than doing nothing. But as someone who believes in consistency of practice, I wanted a technique that I could do at home that was safe and gentle enough that I could recommend it to my grandma. And it worked with how the fascia folds. So to me, there's this misconception, and this is where I feel like I have any pedestal to stand on, is we've been looking at the fascia biomechanically as knots that are created in the system that need to be basically ripped apart, right?
Yeah.
And for me, when I look at geometry, and this is just because like I'm an artist and I spent a year doing murals, and like I look at patterns, and like as a golfer, I know that momentum is built from the ground, that my force of my fist comes from how I'm pushing against the earth. I had the great privilege of working alongside Michael Bentley, who's the founder of something called ground force reaction. He is this very undercurrent of David Ledbetter. Most people in the world, in the golf world, know who David Ledbetter is. His number one researcher is Michael Bentley. Michael Bentley created the PEDAR system, the KVS, everything with Ledbetter's trademark on it. That's Mike's work. Okay. And every good scientist usually needs a king to fund their projects. You know what I mean? So like, no offense to Ledbetter, he's got a great guy on his team. And Mike, like, just throw that guy in a lab. He's got a mind it's just magic. So I'm 105 pounds. I wanted to play at an LPGA level, and I needed to create momentum. He taught me basically an old Tai Chi technique of when you push against the ground, you can carry force through your body in a exponential way. So my pounds per inch that needed to hit my left foot needed to be 200 pounds of load if I was going to hit the ball 250. So golf became a scientific equation, and I built my training mechanism to basically replicate acrobatic training. So in college, I didn't know I was fascia training. Mike didn't know that what we're doing is fascia training, but by using ground force reaction, you're actually twisting the industrial strength fascia bands against each other at a torque to create like you're moving a club backwards, locking it into a position, and then trying to swing at 120 miles an hour within 2.5 seconds. So it becomes very quantifiable in the golf world. Do you know that you break sequences down, just like a bodybuilder that wants to lift 350? If you do that, you have to break the sequence down. So you're like, okay, well, this month we're going to load this way, you know? So it becomes, you're measuring explosive power through the system. So I believe that we need to be treating the fascia from the ground up because of 10,000 reasons, all to me showcased through athletics and my background in golf, and then my background with tensegrity. Floating compression, for me, it starts with our feet. So when there's fascia release techniques that are out there that are focusing on, let's just say you go into a myofascia therapist session, you're like, I have tension headaches and my right jaw is locked up. That fascia therapist is going to go right to your neck and that jaw. And for me, I'm like, that's the wrong approach. Your lateral band, in the fascia world, the lateral band basically mirrors the IT band, but it starts at the bottom of the foot, goes up the side of the leg, through the entire IT band, around the hip, underneath your intercostals, the rib cage on the right-hand side, and connects to the base of the neck. Most people that I deal with that have TMJ issues, lockjaw issues, and tension headaches, their lateral band is destroyed on the lower body. So you go into your myofascia session, they release this, you have short-term relief, and then there's usually pretty, like, it back up in the next 2 weeks and it gets tighter. So when we release it from the ground up, by the first 6 to 9 months I work with people, we only work on the lower body. The fascia bands are so close to the surface and the spine that if we touch the upper body, we have the potentiality of moving the entire spine out of adjustment. And unfortunately, that was like experiment through error because I did that to myself and my ex-boyfriend at the time. I was like, let's just use the sequence on the upper body. It'll be great. I threw my neck out for 2 weeks. I threw his back out for 6 weeks. And I went back to the drawing board and experimented some more. And now I'm very staunch. Like there is a sequence. And this sequence is essential. But when we find the fascia adhesions, instead of ripping it apart, we treat it differently. There's 4 things you have to do. But when you do these 4 things and you respect the timeline, it rebounds. It basically reactivates the hyaluronic acid current. And thanks to Carlos Stecco's discoveries, in my voracious capacity to read research papers, after I read about 20 research papers, I had invented the sequence in my head. And then also Coach Chong Z, who is the hyper arch fascia training guy. I really respect his work. I've eaten everything that he puts out. I think he's brilliant. And in my 2 courses, I give him huge kudos. And I'm just like, I want to work with you. I think he's going to lead the fascia dialogue. And I love how he's taking it. My approach is for sure a little bit different. He doesn't bond it with breath work. He doesn't talk too much about the nervous system, but he is into this piezoelectric current capacity of the fascia. And I think both him and I are going to help people jump from this biomechanical, only looking at the structure, into this electrical conversation, because in the technique, you can actually feel the current change. And when you have that experience in your body, there's this whole other conversation that we can have because it becomes an experience now. We're not just talking about something hypothetically, you know.
I've been obsessed with like rolling my feet with a tennis ball since getting into Chong Z's work. And it's crazy how it changes everything and like how it felt. I think like my own story, it kind of similar to you and Allah's just being like an athlete who gets beat up and from wearing cleats and ankle braces and tape, and like my feet were in just such terrible shape. And then like my calves were really tight because of it. And and then like my hips would be really tight. And they're like, what's wrong with my hip? And like, it's probably your hamstring. And then I hurt my back. And then it was like, okay, we need to figure out how to rebuild my body. And this all makes so much sense. As you're saying, like kind of when you're going out of sequence and doing something, and all of a sudden, like something down in your leg is making your creating like TMG or neck pain, like TMJ. Is that just because of like there's adhesions and it's pulling? So it's something like pulling on that rubber band in the wrong direction. Different.
No, it's the same. If you think of tension, this is like why I love the musical instrument metaphor, and I'm always making it because when you have a stringed instrument, usually you have something on the bottom called a bridge. That's like for like, let's just say guitar, ukulele, saz, all those things, guitar, they all have bridges. So even in the internationally, it's kind of the same. So you have your strings hooked on the bottom, and then you have your tuning pegs on the top. And I had the great privilege of studying with Dr. Kevin Davin, who's obsessed with Dr. PJ Palmer's work, who had the most successful clinic. And Dr. PJ Palmer felt like the body could be tuned from the upper cervical spine downwards. And he invented a machine that measured the nervous system from the top down. And I built a healthcare center around Dr. Kevin Davin. I was a full believer in the education that he was giving, and it also assisted me. I had like a huge healing process with him. And the con with Dr. BJ Palmer's approach, now granted, he had a 90% success rate across symptoms. It was, you can't do it at home. You needed a therapist, and your body could still pop in to like misalignment, which would throw the nervous system out of whack. So they were obsessed with how do we optimize the nervous system by focusing on the bones. And after working alongside Dr. Kevin Davin and being part of so many of his cases, my real question that I was left with was like, how can this be improved upon? Like, what's the missing link here? When we get thrown out of adjustment and the nervous system is now operating like subpar, like I love to believe my body can heal itself. Like I would love to think that I can do this in the mountains away from a doctor. And I kept thinking about an instrument and like how you can tune an instrument by changing the tuning pegs. And Dr. Palmer was tuning the nervous system based on the skull down. And that's how we're formed in the embryo. Like we form from the inside out. But there's this whole walking mechanism that we do as humans that's completely uncommon. And the reason why we can walk is actually from our lateral band that comes from the bottom up. Well, our brains hate being in pain. So when somebody's used to going to a massage therapist, the massage therapist always says, like, hey, you're going to be more sore than you came in because I'm going to basically turn your body back on. Because once your body has tension in it in one spot for 2 weeks, it starts to dull it. So it'll communicate, your body will communicate with your brain saying, hey, we have pain. Hey, we have pain. And then after 2 weeks, it'll do its part to numb that pain for you so that you're not living in chronic injury. Now, when we turn this back on through palpation, through a deep fascia reset, where we're messing with the deep fascia of the body, we're changing the tuning. So when we play with it from the bottom up, to me, by the time that you are in a sequence where you're taking care of your hips and you're about 3 months into training so that the tension levels kind of switched up, you're a little more soft in your lower body, soft in a good way. Like we want the tissues to be honey-like, fluid-like. The upper body tension starts to shift by itself. So people will be like, I'm working on my hip, but my shoulder's cracking. And I'm like, yeah, because your hip's been pulling on your shoulder.
Yeah.
So as we loosen the tension, so think of it like strings. Like if somebody was pulling on the strings of an instrument too tight, it's going to change the tone of it. So more than the biomechanical response, I love how this plays into the energetics because we've all been around people that have that really stubborn brain and are like immobile to like question their views or question authority or question the allopathic perspective. Question religion, like just go back 100 years. What was the insightful, enraged, violent conversation? And what I see a correlation to and why fascia is just one part of the work I do is when the body is tight and tense, the brain is normally tight and tense, and the breath is normally fast and shallow. So I've been teaching breath work for a decade, teaching people how to lengthen the breath. But when I married it with the fascia training, there was an enormous shift. People's like their brain could drop into, it was like the breath work worked 100% instead of like 65%. You know what I mean? Like some people would really feel it. Other people would be like, yo, I've been thinking about work this entire time. But when I added the fascia, yeah, it was almost like everybody could let go of their day and be more present. So I feel like there's a mirror between the tension level of the body and our ability to be soft, open, and constructive with each other, and even in our own minds. So it's like as we soften the tissues of the body, I actually feel like we create more neuroplasticity and our ability to be open. We allow the softening of our brainwaves so that we can respond different. We're not just stuck in this stimulus reaction. And then when we start getting into the breath, that's a whole brainwave conversation of potentiality.
I definitely want to get there, but a couple questions.
I have a couple questions.
Yeah, do you want to jump in?
Well, as soon as you said, because we roll our feet out, as Dan says, my jaw cracks immediately. Like I had TMJ when I used to go to the doctor. Like this was in high school. Haven't been since, so I don't know anything about it. Like it's not lockjaw. I healed a lot of my tension headaches and whatnot. It's not painful or anything. I can just feel it. And I can feel the stretch go up to my hip and stuff. And I will hear the crack as I open my mouth on the right side. Is that bad?
Oh, I don't love those questions.
Yeah.
Here's a white and black answer. We're going to hold you accountable for whatever answer you say. It's all tension.
Okay.
It's like, what kind of song do you want to sing in the tension strings of your body? Like, I don't know about you, but I want to reclaim that feeling of freedom that I had when I was a kid, jumping out of a tree and just being in spring-loaded rebound effect, like 20 feet jump. And I'm like, yeah, my body's got that. Like now to do that as an adult, you're just like, okay, ankles, knees, weird. Like to coach, have you guys tried jumping off of like a 10-foot roof in the last decade?
No,
Well, you jumped off of a
jumped out of a tree and hurt myself,
and
but
it
that was
did not go well.
I was barefoot and I landed on a root. So
Oh,
I jammed my heel into a root that I couldn't
oh,
see because the grass was covering
And
it.
you couldn't walk for like
So,
2 months.
so it wasn't like an unathletic landing, but it
yeah.
wasn't good.
Ugh, that's a variable that you can't really plan for.
Yeah.
But remember being a kid and
Yes,
just making
yeah.
that jump like Superman? So there's this condition of the piezoelectric ability of the fascia, where, and this is what this is why Coach Chong needs to just continue to be looked at every 4 months, because I really feel like he's pushing this EMG study. He found a good doctor that's just like, let's do the thing. And essentially, let's just break down the real belief here. When we're kids and we make that 20-foot jump, our fascia decides midair, we're going to be fluid with no tension.
Mhm.
And so we hit the ground like with this ability to just absorb the shock. And as adults, because our nanotubules are kinked, we can't just like fluid ourselves for that 3.5 seconds that we need to be fluid, because there's too much tension locked up. So wherever we have the tension, we end up hurting.
Mhm.
But to me, if we recondition the tubes to be rebounded back to square, we should be able to reclaim that. So
Okay.
it's like, is it bad? It's like, no, people die in pain all the time. And they like, that's their version of life. But like my version of life, I want to be able to jump off that 20-foot roof and be like, watch this.
Yes. So what's the relationship between fascia and our nervous system? How are they related and connected?
Such a good question. This is why I teach neurology symbiotic with the fascia, because I get great results with people, right? But if they're hyperventilating breathing and continually triggering their stress response, they're not going to have the results as long as they want, and they're not going to get the deep tissue reset. So I want you to picture the scaffolding of what holds the nervous system. So the nervous system, for those of you that don't know, the brain is a 2 to 3 pound pinkish organ that is connected to every single cell of the body through these fiber optic cables that we call nerves. And these nerves touch every cell. Every cell that we have in our body relays electric and chemical information through these fiber optic nerves back to the brain. And that's why when we get a splinter, our body's like, we have a splinter. I will never let you forget for 1 second. When you take it out, I will still remind you. Those are those cells being like, listen, you have to pay attention to me. And our nervous system communicates to our brain at 275 miles an hour. And we're never going to stop this transmission signal. This is how we perceive reality. And just like a side note, the nerves that end in our skin, these are called mechanoreceptors. It's just a fancy word for unencapsulated nerve endings. And there's actually 4 types of mechanoreceptors that help us perceive different information. So like temperature versus like you stepped in something slimy, or you stepped in something that's warm and slimy. Or like you're reaching into your purse looking for your chapstick, and you're like touching, you're like, that's my keys, that's a tissue, what the hell is that? There's my chapstick. Those are mechanoreceptors that send that information back. So the fascia is the scaffolding structure that holds the mechanoreceptors there. Does that make sense? So we have 6 times the amount of mechanoreceptors in our fascia fibers than we actually do our muscles. So like when we're sore and we have a good pump the previous day and then we're sore the next day, that's actually not muscle soreness that we're feeling. That's fascia being inflamed. Like it's the muscle inflaming against the fascia and the fascia experiencing this tightness. The coolest thing about the fascia reset for athletes is your recovery time significantly reduces.
Ooh, okay.
Because as you change that tension level of the fascia, now you're sore the next day, or like you're feeling it in your muscles, but you're half the amount of sore. So it's absurd. So about a year into doing my own sequence, I started gymnastics. And I had met the coach like 8 months before, and I was like, I for sure can't do your training. I was like, I locked up my shoulder. My neck can't handle handstands anymore. And then I like reached out to him 8 months later. He's like, well, what changed? I was like, my body is fluid again. I'm like,
Mm.
I can lift myself upside down, no problem. So here I was having, as an athlete, all of these tension issues. And every athlete I talked to was just like, oh yeah, you're getting older. And I was like, I do not accept, I am 33. I'm going to make 80. Like, my personal goal is to be a super hot 80-year-old.
Yeah. I feel like you're on track. So keep doing what you're doing.
Thanks. That's the goal, you know? So at 33, I'm not ready to give up gymnastics. So it's been the funnest, the side effect, the consequence of this work is my workouts are so much harder. You know, and I get pumped when I'm sore. I'm like, yeah, I really worked it.
You really have to earn it.
Yeah, really, really though. It's kind of fun. But that's how it was as kids. As kids, we'd be like, what do you mean you're sore? You must be old.
Yeah. But it really does seem like so much of what we call aging is really just like maybe not caring for our fascia and not being aware of it.
Okay, so I love this metaphor because in time we always change, right? And like right now I feel like this is the information age. We should be really questioning so many of our routines. And like if we don't like the previous generation and how they're living, we should ask more questions. So unfortunately, there's a little bit of a bully conversation in my part of the world where the older generation is just like, you guys don't work hard enough and you this and that. And I'm like, why would we want to?
Right,
Yeah.
I live in the land of wealthy elderly. And they are miserable and their health is not with them. And I'm just like, you guys really didn't make it look fun. No
I
offense.
couldn't agree more. We could not agree more.
Yeah, you worked really hard, but like, you know, you look old, you feel old, you sound old, you're mean.
You kind of like grumpy old men.
Not a lot of hot 80-year-olds there.
No, none. And when I find like that one attractive 60-year-old man, I was like, what did you do as a child? Like, how do I recognize you when you're 30? Like, because some people, by the time you're 60, I feel like you really see the investment you've made in yourself. But I feel like if we could remember this, in 1938, okay, just not even 100 years ago, we came out with our first nylon toothbrush.
Oh, yeah.
Like we all brush our teeth twice a day. We have been brainwashed since our childhood. You brush your teeth twice a day for 2 minutes, then you floss your teeth. Nobody remembers to floss, but we know it. We know we should do it. But it was normal and natural, like back in the age of George Washington, for people to lose their teeth. George Washington had wooden teeth. He was like prima donna with money. He had white lacquered wooden veneers. And that it was normal and natural. And in our generation, it's normal and natural to have a knee or hip replacement in America. There's 2 million a year. But why? Like when I went to the doctor and said, I have hip problems, they took x-rays. They said, nothing's wrong with your hip. If you still have issues, we'll replace it when you're 35. Then we won't have to replace it again until you're 55. And I'm 18 at this point.
That's insane.
And it's like, can't you guys just teach me how to fix it? Nope. So to me, and then when I did my sequence, when I built it out, I was experimenting with different things, experimenting with different fascia release techniques. When my click went away in my hip after 2 weeks, I was like, this whole time, I've been living with chronic hip injury that took me out of tournaments in college. Like I spent weekends not being able to walk because my bursa was so inflamed. And I fixed it in 2 weeks. Like I at least made improvements. I didn't like fix it. I still feel like I'm fixing it. Like 13 months in, I'm like, man, we're still not at the bone yet.
Oh, wow.
But I'm not limited by it and it doesn't bother me and it's not inflamed. So I'm just still correcting. So yeah, I feel like our concept of aging could be real negotiated.
Yeah,
sure.
I love that.
I'm actually curious because you brought up when you were speaking about I forget her name, forgive me, when you said she healed herself from the rheumatoid arthritis.
Ashley Black.
Yes. And you had mentioned cellulite. Where is, because so many, I think probably just in the fitness industry and as we coach people, so many tell us we're fat, we have cellulite, we want to get rid of it.
Yeah.
What is exactly cellulite? And is that attached to fascia?
For sure. The research before Ashley Black stuff was that cellulite came from the fact that us women have diagonal muscle fibers in our legs and quads, which allow us to store more body fat to care for children. So the philosophy before Ashley Black's research was suck it up. This is how we're built, and this is why we can have babies. What Ashley Black proved was that our muscle fibers are basically the same, so that doesn't make any sense. But the fascia is getting stuck, and a lot of us women sit on our butts a bit more. We sit on our butts a lot more. And when we sit on our butts, we are squishing. Think of those nanotubules. We're squishing those nanotubules. For every minute that we're sitting, we're squishing all of those braids on the backside of our femur, all the way up through the quad. So where the quad and the hamstring meet, where most women have a ton of cellulite, it's filthy. People are like, whoa, it just feels like a brick. And I'm like, yeah. And where you have your most intense, I have this one cute cellulite dimple on my butt. Where that little dimple is the worst adhesion I have in my glute. So it marries each other really well. And as you release the adhesions, your structure changes. It changes on a deep level. I believe it changes on a very deep neurological and nervous system and energetic level. But biomechanically, when you release tension, when you see the fascia bands, right? They're not just like bands that are connected, they're layered on top of each other. So imagine rubber bands, okay? We use the straw analogy. So imagine if these straws were rubber bands that had nanotubules through it, and then we're braiding them together. If you got them knotted up because of an injury, right? To unknot them is just a process. You know what I mean? But so in respecting that process, everything changes. So I don't really believe sciatica pain exists. Everybody that I've had with sciatica pain, they have super intense hamstring issues and calf issues. When those go away, all of a sudden the low back's not being pulled on. You know, so when we start thinking of tension levels, like these rubber bands that get knotted, doesn't it make sense if you had a knot in a bungee cord or a rubber band, it's going to pull harder.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because now we're changing the tension level. Did that answer the question?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
That makes 100% sense. Yes, I asked because I do have some cute little dimples, cellulite dimples on my butt, but mine are some. I have some right above like my knee in the front.
In the front. Yes.
Which I feel like I have more in the front than the back. So it's just interesting. I'm fascinated by all of that.
So Ashley Black's, the reason why I don't like promote her work, because I love her as a researcher, and it's like sad to watch her interviews because she's always like, I thought people were going to really be into the science, but they just want to take care of their cellulite. And I'm like, oh, like one of the best fascia researchers out there feels like she's been put in this celebrity vein bucket. And she's like, there's so much more to say. But I mean, money's green. So like, I get where her marketing team was.
Definitely.
But like soul to soul, I feel her on it. The reason why I don't promote her work, not that I feel like she gets great results with people, is it's just not gentle. She's working with the fascia by breaking it up. And in spots like the upper leg, particularly like the leg and the glute are hard. I don't love using her device on those areas because it's difficult to get to, but you're only getting so deep in the fascia. I just had one of her team members reach out and they're like, well, Ashley Black gets down to the bone. I'm like, yeah, in your hands. You know what I mean? And it's brutal, but like, okay, but not in your quads. So there's like layers of these fascia bands on top of each other. And in order to get to the deeper layers, we have to make this layer fluid. So if we wanted to, and this is where I feel athletes compound injuries because we think we healed it. Because this layer is good, but then it's still sitting under here. And then that's when we have those weird impingements that show up like in our joints over time. And it just makes me like violently upset when I see a 25-year-old blow their ACL that makes 10 mil a year. And I'm like, you guys have the worst rehab protocols. Like icing should be thrown out the window. Like, don't get me started on podiatry. That industry should die. The orthopedic surgeons have made way too much for far too long.
For sure.
Yeah, so I think I want to make the
The jump.
Yeah, the jump here from fascia into breath work and how they're connected still. Like I don't want to lose that thread, but
Yeah. No, thanks for bringing it back. That's why I built a formula. So like some
Mm.
people that found me on Instagram, thank God I have two really close friends that are like, you have to put this work online because I've been teaching locally, all excited. And like not a lot of fitness instructors teach a science class, so it's been weird to be like
Mm.
beating the drum, like come to my science class. And people are like, what? Are we doing exercises? How is this appropriate? And I'm like, no, you guys, we have to treat all three things. So the fascia, the reason why I start fascia with most people is because the fascia holds tension. So if your body if you've been chronically stressed, chronically overstimulated, super overcaffeinated, I'm kind of the first thing I want to do is release your fascia because there's already a tension level in there. And taking the neurological and the breath approach, I'm going to get stuck literally in your body.
mm,
But when we start to release this and the tuning of the body changes to be just even a touch more relaxed, 10% more relaxed, what I do is guide people through the breath because our nervous system is floated in place by the fascia. Now, our brain is that 3-pound pinkish organ made of two types of cells, neurons and glials. I like to say glial is the mystery box. Like neurology, there's a conversation of we think it does this, we think it does that, but we don't really know. So half of our brain is still kind of untapped potentiality. But these neurons, we actually have 86 billion of them. And the way that they talk to each other is through chemical and electrical interaction. And we build our awareness through these neurons. So when we learn something new, the reason why we need to be like it needs to be repeated is because this idea has to fit somewhere in our big brains. The reason why we cry when somebody we love dies is because that neuron that hold all of those memories and experiences have to be rerouted to a different part of the brain, long-term memory. So they
Mm.
move from short-term to long-term. That's why grieving, breakups, we have a responsibility to our neuron clusters. I like to say in the breakup world, you have to coat endings with bittersweet chocolate.
Mm.
Because if you just say, I hate them for all of these things, all of that section in your brain is going to be devoted to this kind of toxic conversation. But if you make the end nice and clean and gracious and grateful, that person gets stored in a very pretty spot in your mind and body. So anything that triggers their memory, it doesn't have to like hurt you. So
mm,
basic neurology to me is a way to make people understand when you're stressed, if we can change the word stress to high beta, we
Mm.
can start to have a more like a frequency conversation because when we're speaking like this, we're all operating in something called beta brainwaves. And beta brainwaves are 16 to 30 hertz. So hertz meaning oscillation of like how loud the neurons are talking to each other. So when we're sleeping, they're pretty quiet. We're in delta, which is 0.3 to 3 hertz. When we just wake up, we're in theta, 4 to 7 hertz. That's where kids live.
Mhm.
You know, in that space of imagination. In theta, our neurons can make new connections. We're no longer traveling down like preconceived highways. Alpha is where most meditations are taught when they're verbally guided and when our eyes are closed. So it's like when we're projecting things. To me, alpha is not the goal with meditation. We should be dropping into theta so we can
Mhm.
access something called gamma. And that's really my overarching theory of work. I want to create a bridge to gamma. We
Mm.
should, as seekers, being able to retain that frequency for minutes at a time, not just a half second to one
mm,
second.
Mm.
So for me, that's where I want to bring all my clients to. That's the goal. Is we hit gamma, but we have to do all of these things correctly. And even the cymatic study, not to get off topic, but side note, the cymatic studies are done on people that have a high breath rate and tense fascia. So
Mm.
we're not going to
mm,
see a breakthrough there until we have clients that can hold the radio tower frequency because it's a voltage. When we're talking about gamma, our brain is operating at a different voltage. It changes the whole perception of our body.
Mm.
Um, so that's really the core of my work. But when the brain is speaking to the nervous system at high stress, so 30 hertz, the nervous system is pulling that stress into the fascia tissues. and clamping. So you can just be reading emails. If you're reading emails and freaking out, your body thinks you're preparing for battle. And when we have a breath rate, the standard resting breath rate is 15 to 25 breaths a minute, which to me is like a real baseline problem. And what my goal is to drop people in half. So I double the capacity of the lung field teaching operatic singing style breathwork techniques. So I made a 10-minute sequence. It's the most powerful sequence that I've come across. I've done a whole series of breathworks, but I was a classically trained singer at 12. And to me, free divers, top of the top. If you have respiratory illnesses, do Buteyko. Buteyko's case studies, nobody can touch. I mean, he reduces symptoms by 80% in 2 weeks. So anybody with COPD and asthma, do Buteyko. They're so hard. I hate those exercises. I'm like, no, I don't want to teach it. I hate teaching it. I hate empty lung apneas. Those are the worst.
They're challenging.
Yeah. So I have lots of respect for the free divers. They really broke down the breathwork sequence into something very measurable, very scientific, kind of like bodybuilding when you're maxing loads. If you want to go 100 feet underwater for 4 minutes at a time, you have to prove your track record with 5 layers of data for 3 weeks in a row. And then you have your permission to go 100 feet in, because your lung field compresses in half when you're like 20 feet underwater. So it's very different training technique in the freediver world. My world is opera and power metal. So singers, what we get really good with breath work is controlled exhales, and like particularly opera. Controlled exhale is all opera. Power metal and rap is recovery inhale. So you have a half a second between one verse to the other, and you have to be ready to belt again. How do you quickly recover? So I teach people how to do you got a 1-inch punch in Kung Fu. I got a 1 second inhale that I teach that you can do when you're recording. So you nose breathe to your max capacity, and then you're ready to belt again. It gives you epic control as a singer. So when you're a singer and you approach breath work, if you do opera style, you're trained this way. If you do power metal style, you train this way. I've combined those two to, in a sense, introduce people to the shape of the breath. My goal with the breath is to double people's lung capacity. It's like 6 weeks, basically, is all it takes me. So the standard untrained lung can hold 5 to 7 cubic liters of air. So if you were to take a big breath and then blow up a balloon, you're going to get maybe 7 cubic liters of air. When you train with me, just by creating a clean lung field, and then we make the muscles that pump the lungs flexible and we make them stronger, to get you to 14 cubic liters takes like 6 to 8 weeks. And then when we double your capacity, your natural and automatic breath pattern drops. So if you're at 14 cubic liters of capacity in your body, your resting breath rate is going to be closer to 5 to 7, 4 to 7 breaths per minute. That changes the brainwave pattern. And the reason for that connection is because of our brainstem. At the base of our brainstem, we have the medulla oblongata. That regulates a few things, but specifically like our heart rate and our breath rate. So people that are practicing, the broken mechanism in breath work for me is that most people are practicing a hyperventilation technique with Wim Hof, Dr. Stanislav Grof, and like, no offense to their science, they're teaching breath as a psychedelic modality.
Yes.
I'm teaching the breath as the breath. So they don't talk about the muscles I talk about. They're not training for the automatic and natural breath pattern. Whereas I'm conditioning for measurable process, like in progress within the system. And really what I want to help people do is slow down time, because as we receive stress, right? Well, we're never going to stop the stress process. It happens at 275 miles an hour. So you can have the most relaxed day, the best breath rituals ever. You get cut off on a highway, boom, danger explodes through the nervous system. When it hits your ganglions for the stress system, your ganglions are like the circuit breakers that trigger the adrenaline, that flood your blood with glucose, that constrict your eyeballs, that stop the digestion, that stops your immune system. It's not about stopping the stress process. That's going to keep us alive. It's about knowing how to immediately recover. And to pull the body from a state of stress back to pleasure takes 4 minutes. And that's because the ganglions are 10 times farther away for the parasympathetic, the pleasure system, than the stress system. We're built to be stressed out in 2 seconds. We're built to recover in an appropriate period of time. But we don't need to, like, we have these elaborate de-stressing rituals. Like in my part of my little family culture, for my uncles, it's a beer. If they can sit with a beer, you can see them sigh. For my aunts, it's a smoke. You know, you can see them like sit and just and
Yeah.
you know, taking a bath, drinking a glass of wine. What I acknowledge all the time is that they grabbed something and then slowed their breath rate down. But this is just the placebo for
Yeah.
slowing the breath rate down. So if we understand to pull the brain literally from high stress to low stress is doubling the length of your exhale. So if somebody's in full panic attack mode and their exhales are 1 second, a 2 second exhale. This is why we have the brown paper bags too. People
Yeah.
are like, oh, you know, it's for carbon loading. And it's like, if you to fill a paper bag, you have to exhale for like 6 seconds. It's literally just a physical cue of slowing your exhale down. So it's tandem. As we train the breath to relax deeper and deeper, the fascia tissues start to hold less and less tension.
Yeah. That makes so much sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely does.
So
Yeah.
if they're doing the fascia work and then still breathing at 30 breaths a minute, the fascia is going to relax and then tense and then relax and tense. And then, you know what I mean? Versus like, okay, we relax it and then we teach everything how to come down so that, you know, we can take in that same stress and we can have this whole internal dialogue while we're taking an inhale before we say anything else, you know?
Yeah, that's so powerful. I feel like so many people just live in that constant state of stress and never have a chance to relax and recover and take care of their health because they're constantly in survival mode and they're breathing in their chest and their mouth breathing and they're tight and stiff. And you mentioned earlier, like very few people, if anybody, can have like a free, open mind while they have a tight, restricted body. And it's like there's no way to access that if you're constantly breathing rapidly and not allowing
Yeah.
yourself to recover. I think this seems like such
Well,
powerful.
imagine even like, you know, I have doomsday. I like live out on a farm, so my neighbors are all very independent minded, and um, it's like for me, wow, if something bad were to happen, right, and we now have to respond as tiny little communities together to whatever it is. If we got stuck off the internet for a month, you know,
Mhm.
if whatever, if systems went down, the people that solve problems in that state of mind know how to breathe slow. So like under pressure, like let's just go there. To me, it's like that let's put all the pressure back on us. Now we don't have anybody else to solve our problems. We can't call the cops, we can't call the hospitals. It's just you and your neighbors. Who's going to be able to think clear? You know, so how do we access creative, imaginative new thought when we're under pressure? And to me, like that's a tool that we should be giving to the next generation. And like that's why I love athletes. Because when you're, you know, for me, I've played so much competitive golf, and golf is a heady sport. So you have like 5 minutes, you know, before your next shot. And it's a
Mhm.
lot of internal dialogue. And I used to just fall apart under pressure, unfortunately. And I just wish I knew how to slow my breath pattern down because I'd panic. And you can't panic and make a 3-foot putt.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's impossible. So these little cues to me are essential, like not only for athletes, but for writers, for creatives, for inventors, for thinkers, for people who want to bond new neuron clusters. You know, we have to be able to slow down in order for this mechanism to really work. If we're always in response mode, we're living in this beta highway. So for me, the vocabulary shift with my clients is we don't use the word stress. We use the word high beta. Because if you're high beta, you already know what I need to do to come out of stress is to go to low beta. So what do I need? How can I slow down the rock and roll concert happening in my brain?
It's cool because it makes everything like quantifiable and
Yeah.
recognize it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like as we're wrapping up, I want to just, we'll ask you, if there's anything you feel you didn't say that you may believe is important for listeners, or connecting any dots for anybody.
The one thing that I'd like to say is that the fascia in the beginning, that when you work with the fascia in the beginning, all we're doing is changing the tension level and removing the tension. But there's an entire other layer once the tension's removed to train your body to operate more optimally.
Mhm.
Where the fascia, once it's unencumbered, there's this entire other athletic thing that we can do within our body. And very soon, there is going to be an ability for people to start to think of ourselves more electromagnetically, because the fascia tissue operates more like mycelium than it does an organ structure. Because it's viscoelastic and piezoelectric, there are qualities in it that we don't really see unless we're ready to understand that we can hold our phone, and we understand that the phone has a field around it, and
Mhm.
that field is helping it interpret and receive information. Well, about 15 years ago, they showed that 30% of people have a supercharged nervous system, meaning that they can perceive energy and information coming from outside the body. It's a cool study, very simple. They blindfolded people and put headphones on them and then moved objects around, and 30% of the people knew where these objects were, even though there was no physical stimulation. Now, I don't think that 30% of people have this ability. I think 100% of us have this ability, but most of us have bad fascia. And when the fascia is too tight around the nerves, we're actually going to disrupt the energy and information, not only coming into our system, but our perception of it. So I find that the aging process is more of a dulling out of these properties that we naturally have as children. So as we tune the fascia to be cleaner and more fluid, other things in our body are capable of coming back online. When we work with the breath and we double our capacity and we start to average at a breath rate per minute, that's a slower frequency, we change our consciousness. Consciousness as our ability to be aware and to perceive. So we're making subtleties way more conscious in my program. Um, but at the same time, we're learning how to feel deeper. There is a shape to the breath. Most people experience the breath very linearly. So even when I train them, they can only feel a lower field and an upper field of the lung. There is a shape. It's a Fibonacci shape. And when we learn how to control the muscles that are around the lung field, you can actually control how the gas flows within the lungs. But you have to be able to feel those tissues first. So most people can't feel their intercostals or our ability to
Mhm.
expand them. But this is just the first layer. Once we get to in a level 2 of the breath, we start to add the pelvic floor. This is when we start to spin the lymph and the blood system the way that the Chinese Kung Fu masters have been talking about moving the Danshin. There's a marriage between a meditative experience and the ability of the body to move the currents of the gases and the liquids through the body. Then, when we turn the mechanoreceptors back on with the feet, our voltage actually changes because our body can take in electrons from the earth. So, as we start to play with the fascia and retune it, and we double the capacity of the breath, that is just point A, because what happens in the brain is significant. And to me, if you're somebody who's called to experience transcendental states of consciousness or invent something new or create new something new, that all happens from a place of gamma brain waves, which is 30 to 100 hertz. But we don't get there from overstimulation. We get there from being able to self-regulate and expand into the full awareness of our radio tower structure.
Mhm.
So to me, the point of being alive is to do it well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I hope I can plant some seeds. Like, yeah, we should take care of the fascia. Yeah, we should take care of the breath, but it has nothing really to do with the breath and nothing to do with the fascia. These are the puzzle pieces to experience reality in a way where we can giggle at the grand design. And for people that have been seeking in different ways, I feel like we touch that, we get that. And sometimes it's a retreat, sometimes it's been plant medicine, sometimes it's been
Mhm.
a ceremonial pilgrimage that you took in another country, and then you come back to mundane reality and you're like, man, I wish I could get back there. We can get back there. We just have to use the doorways within us better. The vehicle has to come with us into those states. So we just have to get the dirt off out of the way. Um, so my intent with the work that I'm doing is really it's a cultural shift. We're ready for the electromagnetic jump. It's going to take a lot of science on the front end and experience for people to get there. Without psychedelics, I feel like people that love psychedelics or they love delirium ceremonies, or there's a lot of ways to induce a psychedelic trip without psychedelics. But for those people that are closed off to that, that's fine too. It's the body. The body can handle the frequencies. The brain can handle the frequencies. So I have included a couple links for you guys. If you want to learn some more information, there's a link for the brain and breath connection that has an equation that I built out about just how we can start to toggle switch the brain waves more consciously. So a non-hyperventilation breathwork technique, slowing the breath down, as well as some fascia information, just some tips that we can do to keep healthy fascia, as well as links to my courses. So I did make a film that really puts together everything that we touched in a more comprehensive way with a lot of illustrations. That's called the Brain and Breath Connection. I'm very passionate about it because to me, it acknowledges this rhythm and pattern we're all living in. And then the fascia course is there for people to get started. And I'll be releasing my breath course in the next couple weeks, actually.
Awesome. That was perfect. I feel like you wrapped it up so perfectly with the connections of everything.
Cool.
I feel like my mind has been blown. I need to integrate all of this wisdom and knowledge that you shared with us. My gosh, you are certainly, I want to give you credit because you have mentioned a plethora of people that admire you, or you admire, and that I've learned from you. I mean, we've learned so much. I've taken so much. I cannot thank you. I know the listeners will. I think that this is just one of hopefully many conversations that we can continue the relationship and connection. Like, I know that I don't think it's a coincidence that the universe brought us together. So Brooke, thank you for sharing all of this with us and our listeners.
You're so welcome.